Hey guys, I've been asked over the years a bunch of times to make a packing video. So here's the techniques I use and how I pack for my jumps. It's not the only way to pack a base rig, and this is just the way that I've been doing it for for 6.5 years, nearly 2,000 jumps, and it's worked really well for me. It's important to stress that if you're new to base jumping, learning to pack is a very small part of what you're going to be doing. And when I learnt to base jump, I did a similar thing, found a packing video, taught myself mostly, and I didn't realise till years later a lot of the mistakes I was making. So if you're going to learn to pack, great, but afterwards definitely seek plenty of advice and mentorship. There's plenty of good courses out there and lots of information, but don't go running head on into base jumping alone. It's a really dangerous, stupid idea. So there are two parts to this packing video. The first part is slider off packing, which is
thanks for watching this packing video.
Around. If you guys got any questions, drop me a message on Lemons Base on Facebook or Instagram. And it's worked really well for me. This is just for all those jumps. Just my way of packing. There's plenty of other methods out there.
The differences I use when packing a terminal
and getting plenty of advice face to face.
It's important for me to stress that I don't do much terminal base.
So if you're going to start learning from scratch a terminal pack job, then it's really worth finding someone who's very experienced in terminal base jumping, who can really talk you through that pack job and really keep an eye on you. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is lay your canopy and your container out. It's best to find a good area that's grippy. Like a slippery wooden floor like this is a real pain in the ass for keeping line tension. But we've got a rug and a mat for the container, so it shouldn't be too bad. Once you've laid the container down and got the risers symmetrical and even, you're going to need a decent packing weight or a stake in the ground if you're packing on grass. And you're going to need something that's plenty heavy enough so that when you're pulling line tension you don't slide it around, but not something that's going to move around and be a pain in the ass, like Danny. This box full of Nazi gold that I found in Switzerland is perfect. Once you've got a decent weight on your risers, you need to pick up your lines, separate your control lines and your rear and front risers, and do a basic line check. By doing this process every time before you pack, it helps you to see if there's any kind of step throughs or other issues that you've created by stuffing the parachute into the stash bag after a jump. You should be checking back to the container and making sure that they're all clear and free and not wrapped around each other in any way. So now take your rear risers and control lines in your right hand and your front risers in your left hand, and walk towards the canopy, picking it up and rotating it 90 degrees so the nose is on your left. Give it a little shake and try and swing it out to lay it down as flat as you possibly can. It helps now to take the control lines and pull the tail to the side, because we won't be doing anything with the tail until later on in the pack job. Once the canopy is laid flat, pull the bridle clear so it's out of the way, and get your packing clamps. I like to start by clamping the packing tabs in line with the B-line attachment points, and I work my way towards the tail with the B, C and D packing tabs and leave the nose till last. So make sure you count the tabs as you go, so you're counting seven tabs in line with each line group attachment points. I take each packing tab starting from the bottom, working my way to the top, keeping line tension and spreading the fabric evenly. It really helps to have a contrasting center cell at this point. Humans are generally pretty stupid, so it's easier to count to 3, then see a pretty colour, then count to 3 again than it is to count to 7. And it's all about technique and repetition. By spreading the fabric and by lifting, giving each packing tab a quick lift up and laying it down, it helps spread the fabric by itself. But the neater this is, the more it will help you later on in the pack job. I use 4 Wolfcraft MT70 clamps, which I got from eBay. They seem to work really well. You can clamp quite far ahead of where the packing tabs are, and that way if you're giving your pack job some extra line tension at any point in the pack job, you're less likely to slide them off of the canopy. Always clamp quite far ahead of the packing tabs. If you clamp the packing tabs, you're more likely to slide the clamp off at some point, and it can be a real pain. It's easy to get complacent at this point as it's just constant repetition, but make sure you get 7 cells each time, otherwise you'll be really frustrated when you get halfway through the pack job and realize something's not right. Once you have the D-lines clamped, move the canopy to your left so that I've got room to work on the nose in line with the container. Fold the nose to one side and then start laying it back down on top of itself so that it's symmetrical from one side to the other. So some canopies have bigger ZP noses than others, some have slats on the nose. The point where you're going to actually clamp the nose isn't at the end of the ZP, it's always going to be in line with the line attachment points, so you should be able to find the seam inside the ZP. You should feel that. If not, then look down towards the container and make sure the lines are all sitting perfectly as they did with the B, C and D lines, and that's where you should clamp. So now we're going to turn the canopy 90 degrees so it's facing the same way as the container. So keeping some tension in front of the clamp, we're going to separate the nose, take 3 cells and tuck them underneath, the center cell scrunch into the middle and 3 cells laying down flat. So now it's facing the same way as the container. We put some tension on that clamp, move to the next one, and we're going to separate the canopy. If you don't have a contrasting center cell, then it's really important to count 3 cells either side of the center and reach in and try and spread the fabric using a kind of chopping motion to flick it out to the sides. Give the center cell a gentle tug towards you and do the same on the other side, even though it will be harder to see and do because of the rest of the canopy laying on top. And repeat the process. Although this is only a rough way to separate the canopy half and half facing the right direction of flight, the neater you get at this stage, the easier the rest of the pack job will be. Remember to hold the fabric in front of the clamp because it's quite easy to slip the clamp off of the fabric at this stage. So once you've separated that part of the canopy, you should now lift the tail over to your right so that you don't have anything resting on the 3 folds on your left, and you can now shake out the fabric a little bit better on this side. Now pass half of the tail back across, so the canopy is now 50-50 left and right. At any point, if you feel like you've made too much of a mess with the lines, they're spreading out too much, you can go back to the clamps, starting from the bottom, working your way to the top, reaching in, grabbing the fabric in front of the clamps so you don't slide them off, and give them a gentle tug towards you to reapply line tension. Now this might do for Brento, but since we're practicing a pack job for real base jumping, at this point we tidy everything up. So you should be looking for 4 lines on each side of each group. So you start at the bottom with the A lines, find 4, slide your hand up the seam until you have line tension in like a chameleon hand kind of grip. You're not actually squeezing the fabric, you're just sliding your hand up until you get the tension. Once you have the tension, you can slide your right hand in on top of your left hand and spread the fabric out. Depending on the canopy, it's not always easy to see 4 lines in each group. The stabilizers quite often on a lot of models get in the way of 2 of the lines. So you should be able to feel the line attachment points and make sure that you can fill 4 lines all around the same length. It can be different depending on models. My experience in packing is mostly with at-air canopies such as the Vision, the OSP, the OSP2, and this is a great way to pack for those canopies. Once you've finished one side, move on to the other. Again, I prefer to work from the opposite side of the canopy so I can see into the pack job and see what I'm actually doing. I'm going to slide your hand up till you get line tension and just spread the fabric out. You're always looking for the seam of the center cell, and that should be about the right place to slide your hand up and place each line group on top of the last. So like skydiving, you're trying to put the lines in the center of the pack job and the fabric on the outside. Not only are you trying to make the pack job as symmetrical as possible, this will also protect the fabric from line burns. Always work above where you have line tension. If you start to work below where your hand is keeping tension, then you can easily just move the lines around and mess up the work you've already done. So if you need to go back to a previous line group to really tidy it up, always get line tension below where you want to neaten up. Always work above the tension. At any point, you can go back to the clamp and reapply line tension. So now I take up some slack on the control lines by gently looping the tail over on top of the pack job. This will stop you disturbing the pack job when you go to set the brakes. So picking up the tail pocket, working your way across until you find the first of the control line cascade lines. Run your finger and thumb down the line to start working out any twists that may be in the line. It's really important to do this as the twist can contribute towards things like tension knots. Once you've worked the twists out of the lines, it's time to set the brakes. The control lines on a base canopy typically have 2 settings, a deep and a shallow brake setting. For slider downs, you normally would use the deep brake setting, which is obviously the brake setting closest to the tail. We take the white loop on the risers, place it through the deep brake setting, then through the metal ring on the risers, and stow the toggle through this white loop. And place the toggle into the keeper. Make sure that the toggle is velcroed down properly and stow the excess neatly. Having the excess on the outside of the riser, you have a risk of grabbing the excess before the toggle. Having it on the inside means you have the line coming out on the outside of the riser, which isn't as neat, so make your own choice there. So remember, the white loop on the riser goes through the deep brake setting, then through the metal ring on the risers, and stow the toggle through this white loop. Make sure the Velcro is stuck properly. Then put some tension on the control lines just to preload the white loops, so they're not shock loaded on opening and harder to release. Now we're going to tidy up the tail. We start with the stabilizer, pushing all of the tail over to one side, and just slightly offset of the center of the pack job, you're going to look for the seam by the stabilizer that's in line with the control lines. And grabbing the fabric in between these seams, gently feed it across, clamp it down with one hand and spread the air out with the other. Repeat the process over and over, so each layer should sit on top of the last and be roughly the same. Some seams don't have lines attached to them, but it's quite easy to see as they should all sit pretty symmetrically on top of one another. By trying to grab the fabric in between seams and teasing it across, it's much easier to lay it down in the perfect position, rather than trying to grab it at the seam and place seams on top of each other, which will just mess up the fabric. The seam in the center of the tail, in the middle of the tail pocket, will be the center of your pack job. Now it's time to move on to the other side. Again, fold everything over to one side and work your way back, starting with the stabilizer and looking at those seams, placing them just offset of the center. Now is usually a good time to reach in front of your clamps, working from bottom to top and reapplying line tension just to make sure everything is neat and the lines are sitting in the right places. Remember that by reaching in front of the clamps and pulling the fabric instead of the clamp, you're way less likely to slide the clamp off of the pack job. Now, one of the most important parts of the pack job is setting the tailgate. We take the control line and the center C line of each side, making sure they're clear and always starting from the container. Run your fingers up these lines until you reach the tail. Now, making sure they're all clear, you will then use the tailgate that is connected to one of the center C lines to form a loop around all of the control lines and the other center C line. This will help stage the opening and help prevent malfunctions such as line overs. Always make sure that the elastic band you use on this is in good condition. If it's looking like it could split but you think you might get one more out of it, don't risk it, change the elastic band. Now the tailgate is set, it's time to remove the clamps. I like to add a little bit of line tension just before releasing them, starting from the bottom and working my way up. With your 3 folds on either side, I like to put a 90-degree fold in each layer. This helps stop the air getting onto the bottom skin of the canopy before it starts to rush into the nose. There are many ways to do this, but symmetry is the most important thing. Now it's time to move the tail down to the bottom of the canopy. Gently ease it down, easing the first seams halfway and then the tail pocket to just past the bottom of the canopy, so it's just resting on the lines. And then I kneel on the tail pocket either side of the lines. Now, using the center cell of the tail pocket, I start to wrap it around all of the tail, including the stabilizers, and gently keep easing the center of the tail around the rest of the tail. You have to keep easing some of the center cell fabric out and rolling it around the rest of the tail until the tail is slightly narrower than the tail pocket. The tail pocket is typically about the width of the container, so you need to make it slightly narrower so that when you fold the sides of the canopy over the top, it will still fit inside the container. Now we've got the tail to the width that we wanted, you can take the clamp off one of the sides, squash the air out to help you fold it, and fold the 3 fold layers over half of the tail. Reapply a clamp somewhere in the bottom third of the canopy and another clamp in the top third. Repeat the process on the other side, release the clamp, control the canopy and fold the 3 fold layers over the top of the tail. Now it's time to remove your packing weight or packing stake so that we can stow the lines. So sit down above the tail pocket, undo the Velcro, place the lid of the tail pocket out of the way, and reach into the compartment to expose the primary stow. Bring the lines towards you to create a fist-sized loop. Then double wrap the primary stow elastic band around the lines. And place that loop inside the compartment that houses the primary stow elastic band. Now you need to figure eight the lines. I use an overhand technique which feels strange at first but seems to be the easiest way for me. Starting with big figure eights that fill the tail pocket and gradually decreasing them in size. As with a lot of things in the pack job, technique really helps make this easier. Once the risers reach the tail pocket, I cascade the lines forwards. This helps prevent them falling into each other. or carefully do up the tail pocket Velcro, making sure you don't trap any lines. There have been malfunctions in the past linked to lines being trapped in new tail pocket Velcro. Once you have carefully closed the tail pocket, you can place the risers to the edges of the tail pocket. Now it's time to put the canopy on top of the container. It's best to slide the container to the canopy, as the container is usually stronger and less valuable. Place the bottom edge of the tail pocket in line with the bottom edge of the container, or the seam that will become the bottom edge of the container. Now you should make sure that the risers follow round from the front of the container, over the shoulders and down to the bottom corners of the container. It's good to place the toggles inwards so that they're not being squashed flat, so they're easier to find on opening. And repeat on the other side. It's good to make sure there are no creases in the container on the shoulder straps and that the risers aren't pulled too tight around the front. And now we need to make the first of the S folds. Where you make this fold does depend on what container you are using, but on this model I usually make it just below the top edge of the container. I use one arm to bar off the pack job, and then with the other arm supporting the rest of the pack job the best I can, I slap it over and make sure it hasn't untucked at all on the sides. Now it's time to fold the nose. This is a really important part of the pack job. The way you fold it and the symmetry can really influence the opening. So I fold all of the nose over to the left, squash out some air to help work with the ZP. It can be a bit awkward, especially when new. Take 3 cells on the right, I fold those 3 cells to the left, squash the air out, and then fold them back over just offset of the center so that the seams are vertical. I then half that, folding those 3 cells back on top of themselves so that they're vertical again. And then I fold all of that over once. You can use a clamp to help keep these in place. I then move the center cell out of the way and repeat the process on the other side. Remember, symmetry is the most important thing here. I fold the 3 cells over, squashing some of the air out. Then just offset of the center, I fold those 3 cells so that the seams are vertical. I then half that again so that you have another layer that is vertical on top of the seams. I then fold all of that over once. Then I take the nose center cell and I gently feed it around the pack job. You may have to remove 2 of the clamps at this stage. Looking into the center of the pack job, you should be able to see the vents either side of the pack job and the symmetry. Now it's time to do the second fold. I remove the last 2 clamps and using an overhand grip, control the canopy and the nose and put the second fold in line with the bottom of the container. Make sure the bridle is coming out of the center of the pack job. I then kneel on the pack job, pinning it in place and look around the room for a pull-up. Now it's time to start closing the container. Look to the manufacturer's recommendations for closing your kind of container. Whilst closing the container, make sure you don't pull the side flaps across, causing the canopy to roll over itself or crease in any way. Try to keep the canopy as flat as possible and in the intended shape. Orientation of the pins can be very important, especially in short slider down delays. I recommend watching videos on watchthighbridle.com on pin locks, especially for some really good, helpful advice and scary videos that may make you feel like you're going to die. You can help keep your closing loops in good condition by wrapping your pull-up cord around the pin so that it's extracted on the underside of the pin and not rubbing against the loop. Most modern containers have dynamic corners. Usually they're placed against the sidewall of the container. But again, check the manufacturer's recommendations if you're unsure. The bridle routing and pin orientation vary from one container to the next, so it's important to look up the manufacturer's recommendations. I personally have seen poor pin orientation and tension almost result in fatal injury with friends, so it's a very important thing to learn about. At this point you may have to tidy up the top flap and set the riser covers. At this point I'll usually walk on the pack job, keeping my feet even just to squash out some of the air. Once I've finished putting the canopy into the container, I'll always store the bridle and the pilot chute in the BOC to eliminate any misrouting whilst gearing up. If the pilot chute is bigger than a 42, I won't put the whole pilot chute into the BOC, as that can cause the BOC to be stretched and not suitable for smaller pilot chutes going stowed. I just place some of the bridle and some of the mesh into the BOC, which will still eliminate the risk of misrouting the bridle through one of the laterals or leg straps, which has been the cause of multiple fatalities. This is how I stow the pilot chute. First, I make sure there are no twists in the bridle. Then I run my hand up the mesh and I fold the ZP in half. I lay the pilot chute down and unfold the ZP. Then I fold the mesh in half. In the center of the mesh, I start to S-fold the bridle. Leaving enough bridle so that it can follow the right hand flap of the container down to the BOC and along the BOC. I then fold the mesh over the S-folded bridle. This will protect the ZP of the pilot chute from the bridle. I then fold the ZP back in half, trying to place as much of the mesh and S-folded bridle against the apex of the ZP so that I have something really substantial to grab hold of when it's time to pull the pilot chute out. I then symmetrically start folding the pilot chute inwards until the fabric feels tight. Keeping a good control of the pilot chute, making sure there are no twists in the bridle. I then carefully slide the pilot chute into the BOC. You may have to pull a little bit of bridle out if you haven't left enough at this point. It's then important to make sure that the bridle is tucked away so that you can't grab it with your thumb whilst trying to reach the pilot chute. Ta-da!